Good evening, my foreign friends. I am Lino. Today, I want to talk about a strange phrase that suddenly went viral on the Chinese internet in late 2025. The phrase is called America's kill line. If you've never heard of it, don't worry. Most people outside China haven't. But inside China, for a few months, this phrase was everywhere, on social media, on video platforms, and even in discussions from state media. It started as a way to describe what some Chinese commentators claim is the hidden fragility of the American middle class. But then something unexpected happened. Chinese netizens took this phrase and turned it back on their own society. And that transformation tells us a lot about propaganda, public opinion, and internet culture in China. So let's start from the beginning. The term kill line originally comes from video games. In many games, enemies have something like a finishing threshold. When their health drops below a certain point, the player can trigger a finishing move and kill them instantly. That threshold is called the kill line. Chinese internet users borrowed this gaming term and applied it to real life. They started using it to describe the financial situation of many American families. The argument goes like this. On the surface, Americans earn relatively high salaries. But behind those salaries are heavy financial obligations, mortgages, car loans, student loans, medical bills, insurance costs. So according to this narrative, the financial chain holding everything together is extremely fragile. As long as everything goes smoothly, life looks stable. But if something unexpected happens, losing a job, a medical emergency, or a sudden expense, the family could fall below the kill line. And once that happens, the story goes, the entire financial structure collapses very quickly. Within months, a middle-class family could fall into poverty or even homelessness. In this narrative, the American middle class is portrayed as living constantly on the edge of disaster. Some Chinese commentators even tried to give this idea a specific number. They claimed that in many large American cities, a family of four needs about $140,000 per year just to maintain a middle-class lifestyle. Anything below that income level, they argue, means you're dangerously close to the kill line. This idea spread very quickly online. But where did it come from? The phrase first became popular thanks to a content creator on the Chinese video platform Bilibili. His online name was Lao A. He claimed to be a Chinese student studying at a medical school in Seattle. In his videos, he told dramatic stories about what he supposedly witnessed in the United States. He said that as a part-time job, he helped collect bodies for a local medical examiner. Through that job, he claimed he saw many tragic cases. For example, he described engineers who supposedly lost their jobs, couldn't afford rent, and ended up living in underground drainage tunnels. Stories like these spread rapidly across Chinese social media. Within 2 months, his channel reportedly gained millions of followers. But the story didn't stop there. Soon, Chinese state media started repeating the concept. Articles and commentaries began connecting the America's kill line narrative to broader criticisms of American society, especially inequality, healthcare costs, and capitalism. The structure of the narrative was usually very similar. First, show shocking examples of hardship in the United States. Then argue that these problems are the natural result of capitalism. And finally compare that system to China's social model. The conclusion was clear. China's system, according to this narrative, is supposed to be more stable and more humane. At one point, the topic even reached the international stage. During the World Economic Forum, a Chinese journalist reportedly asked Janet Yellen what she thought about the so-called American kill line. That moment pushed the discussion to its peak. But then something interesting happened. Chinese internet users began to reinterpret the phrase. Instead of using it only to criticize America, they started using it to describe problems inside China. For example, many people began talking about the 35-year-old employment kill line. In China's job market, there is a widespread belief that once a worker passes the age of 35, it becomes dramatically harder to find a job. So people started joking that turning 35 means crossing the career kill line. Others used the term to describe housing problems. Some people talked about the unfinished apartment kill line. In China, many families have paid mortgages for apartments that were never completed by developers. For those families, buying the wrong apartment can destroy their finances. So the phrase became a dark joke. People also started talking about things like the mortgage kill line, the marriage kill line, and even the speech kill line. That last one was especially sarcastic. Some netizens joked that the real kill line in China is simply the moment when you say something online and suddenly your post disappears. In other words, censorship. Actually, I've seen this kind of irony in real life too. Among people I know, some have even started joking about something they call China's kill line. For example, one friend told me that in China there are many invisible kill lines. If you cross them, your life can change very quickly. Maybe it's the 35-year-old job market barrier. Maybe it's buying an apartment that later becomes an unfinished building. Or maybe it's simply saying the wrong thing online. When people say China's kill line, they're not really making a formal political argument. It's more like a quiet form of sarcasm, a way to express anxiety without saying things too directly. This is actually something that happens quite often in Chinese internet culture. A phrase that begins as propaganda against another country eventually turns into satire about domestic problems. And once that happens, the authorities usually become less enthusiastic about promoting it, which is exactly what happened here. After the discussion began drifting toward criticism of China's own social pressures, official media gradually stopped emphasizing the term. Outside China, Western media and economists have also responded to the idea of the American kill line. Many of them are highly skeptical. For example, some commentators argue that the entire concept is essentially a propaganda narrative designed to highlight American weaknesses. Publications like The New York Times and The Economist have pointed out several issues with the claims. One commonly cited statistic in Chinese discussions is that more than 30% of Americans cannot immediately produce $400 in cash. But economists say this statistic is often misunderstood. Many people may not have cash on hand at that exact moment, but they can still use credit cards, savings accounts, or short-term borrowing. So the number of people who truly cannot handle a $400 emergency is much smaller than the statistic implies. The same criticism applies to the $140,000 figure. Economists say that number usually reflects the income required to maintain a comfortable middle-class lifestyle in expensive cities, not the income required simply to survive. It also ignores huge differences in cost of living across the United States. Another point often raised is homelessness. The number of homeless people in the United States has indeed increased in recent years. But even so, it still represents only about 0.23% of the total population. In other words, it is a serious social problem, but not something that suddenly happens to the average middle-class family overnight. Finally, some people have also questioned the credibility of the original storyteller. There are doubts about whether Lao was really studying medicine in Seattle, or whether his stories about working with a medical examiner were accurate. Some critics even suspect that he might have been connected to a broader propaganda ecosystem designed to amplify negative images of American society. Whether that suspicion is true or not is difficult to prove. But what we can clearly see is how the story evolved. First, a dramatic narrative about American society went viral. Then official media amplified it. Then the public repurposed it for satire. And eventually the narrative lost momentum. To me, the most interesting part of this story is not whether the kill line exists. Every society has economic pressure and financial risk. The interesting part is how information travels. A single phrase can move through several stages: gaming slang, internet meme, political propaganda, and finally social satire. By the end of that process, the phrase means something completely different from what it meant at the beginning. And sometimes the people who created the narrative lose control of it. That's the strange life cycle of ideas on the internet. Anyway, I'm curious what you think. Do you think the American middle class is financially fragile? Or do you think the idea of the kill line is exaggerated? Let me know in the comments. And if you're interested in how people inside China talk about the world, and sometimes about their own society, consider subscribing to this channel. See you next time.